Before I start on this subject, I should mention that this presentation has been developed from a brief visit to Chris Watton's premises, and with the agreement of Paul Fontenoy, the editor of the Nautical Research Journal, from an article in that excellent quarterly dealing with an interview of Chris by Ron Nielsen. And Ron has actually built kits that have been designed by Chris. Now, my visit to Vanguard Models was in the summer of 2024 at Cinderford, toward the northern end of the Forest of Dean, close to the Welsh border. Given that Vanguard Models have become a popular brand in a very short space of time, I was surprised and full of admiration for the way in which Chris manages to produce such high quality ship model kits in fair quantity in a space no larger than a normal two-sized garage. And we will return to the workshop later. Now, this talk is very much aimed at Vanguard Models, but it would make sense to take a look at Chris's background before he set up his kit design and building business. Chris was born in 1966 in Worcestershire. His first introduction to model making as a schoolboy was aided by his father in helping him cope with the original Airfix model of HMS Victory. All those guns. It would never be my choice. He subsequently built a mass of plastic kits in the latter half of the 1970s, but it was not until 1990 that he found the time and space to restart model building, and this time it was to static display models of famous sailing vessels that he turned. This led him to join the UK-based kit producers Caldercraft, whose parent company is Jokita. At Jokita, he was asked to assist in the development and design, production of a new range of kits, which included a series of super detailed tugs. The design work involved a lot of hand drawing of parts. He'd not yet met up with computer-aided design. At the same time, he was entering ship models at the National Model Engineer Exhibition at Olympia, winning gold, silver, and bronze medals each time he exhibited. And these were all models of iconic sailing vessels. At Caldercraft, he was asked to design several of the now well-known Nelson's Navy series. The period ship model had always been his first love, as it has been mine. In all, he designed 16 models at 1 to 64 for this series, starting with the 18-pounder frigate, the Diana. All the plans were developed from existing Admiralty drafts and from reliable reference books. Now, well-known ships within this range included HMS Agamemnon, allegedly Nelson's favorite ship, HMS Cruiser, the name ship of an enormous class of brig sloops, and HMS Mars, another brig sloop. And listed within this series are HMS Victory at 1 to 72, though this kit was not completed by Chris. And surprisingly, the Mary Rose was also in the series at 1 to 80. Now, some of you may be familiar with a well-known kit of the bomb ketch Granado. This kit is now marketed by Caldercraft. In fact, when Chris left Caldercraft and then joined Amati, he then designed the kit for the latter firm, using CAD, which by then he had mastered, is massively improving his productivity. Now, Caldercraft got wind of this and promptly designed their own and got it on the market. Now, there followed a court battle, which Chris won and Caldercraft lost, together with thousands of pounds. During his time with Caldercraft, he also took on private commissions, projects from sailing ships to battleships, and including dioramas. Now, it's important to point out at this point, and all his future exploits, he was entirely self-taught. It just shows what you can do if you're really passionate about something. His work for Amati in Italy started in 2001, and he remained with that firm until 2018. From 2007 to 2018, he actually worked in Italy and managed to speak their language to a certain extent. Whilst with Amati, he designed and supervised the production of their Victory model range. Now, this range included HMS Pegasus and HMS Fly. Now, both of these are Swan-class sloops. He also made Lady Nelson, which is a cutter, and the Revenge, a delightful subject. HMS Vanguard he did. That's Nelson's flagship at the Battle of the Nile, and the brig Mercury. During his time at Amati, he designed and built a 1:72 model of HMS Bellona. Now, this was an experimental model insofar that he felt that the normal practice of making fake lower deck gun ports should be discarded, and that the lower deck should be treated in just the same way as the upper deck. In the event, Amati did not proceed with his design, which is sad, as the Bellona was an iconic vessel, and it must have been very disappointing for Chris not to have this lovely model marketed as a kit. He has intimated that he may yet produce the Bellona, but at a scale of 1:64. And I wonder if he'll put her on the slipway like the large model in the possession of the National Maritime Museum. By the time he finished at Amati, he had completed 22 kits for them, not all in the Victory model series. In fact, the last was for the Cutty Sark as a ship in a bottle. He admitted to me that the reason he left was that some of his designs were not being put into production. In my opinion, a very good reason to bid the firm goodbye. During the period he spent at Amati, he did some freelance work for the French firm Hachette. By early 2018, he confessed to Ron Nielsen that he was beginning to feel burnt out. But after a pause and encouraged by Chuck Passaro, he rallied and at the end of that year decided to set up his own firm, Vanguard Models. He was now 52. Wow. To finance this venture, he decided to sell his car. As a bit of a petrolhead, I was prompted to ask him what cars interested him, to which his response was TVRs. And for those of you who are not British sports car enthusiasts, TVR was a company that created a limited production of very successful medium-sized sports cars. Now, Chris had a TVR Tamora on which he spent quite a load of money. This included uprating the engine from 3.6 to 4.2 litres, quite a lot of grunt for a light compact car. So it must have been a real wrench for him to part with his machine. And now to the meat of the subject, Vanguard Models. In our conversations in his automated workshop, we first touch on the research and preparation side of the business and the principles behind his production of kits. Now, one of my key interests in a model is its scale. And I was delighted to find that we both felt that a series must be designed to the same scale. We also agreed that 1:64 or 3/16 of an inch to the foot is an ideal scale, allowing the incorporation of much detail whilst not rendering so vast a model that she in charge will not accept it in the house. One of the reasons that many of us like using the same scale is to be able to compare effectively one model with another. And in this picture, you can compare the minute brig sloop Speedy with the 24-pounder frigate Indefatigable, a Razid 64-gun ship designed by Sir Thomas Slade in 1761. She, the Indefatigable, is famous in that in 1797, as a frigate under the command of Sir Edward Pellew, later Lord Exmouth, she drove ashore onto the Brittany coast the French 74-gun ship Droit de l'Homme in a gale. So far as I know, all Vanguard models are to the same scale of 1 to 64 as shown in this image. Incidentally, the model of Indefatigable is a prototype which Chris built to test the design and to ensure that every component fits into place perfectly before the kit is marketed. I rather like seeing this model unpainted and without any rigging. It shows off the fine detail and precision, I say again precision, that Chris can achieve. Another of Chris's principles is that the model maker should never feel overwhelmed. Now, let me give you an example of this. I have a model of the cutter Alert. Now, this model was not made by me, for at the moment I've lost the feeling in my fingers, but it was built by a friend who is a retired dockyard shipwright and builds models semi-professionally. Having looked carefully at the image advertised in the finished model, I noticed that the hull was planked in the carvel style, but the Alert, built at Dover as a cutter, was clinker built. That's what they do there. So when I rang Chris about this, his response was that carvel would be difficult for someone relatively new to model building, but that an experienced modeler would be able to convert it to clinker. So he delivered the kit with carvel planking. My friend, an experienced model maker, managed to render it in clinker. Not easy. Now, as an aside, on the website Ships of Scale, a UK-based contributor came up with a clever answer to this problem. He also had bought a kit of the Alert, and when it came to planking her, he beveled the top edge of each strake to make the laying of the planks that much easier. But the difficulty with clinker comes at the stem and at the stern post, where each plank has to lie flush within a rebate there. But how to do that is not in the scope of this talk. As you will see later, their breaching lines and gun tackle included, and that the deck should have a light stain, and that the caulking line between the planks should be strengthened. And that's what I wanted for my model of the Alert. As with all kits, even the best ones, small improvements are always possible. The great thing about Chris's kits is that what is provided is top quality. Now, continuing this thoughtfulness for the builder, Chris provides the best instruction booklet I have ever seen. It starts with the history of the real ship on which the kit is based. Now, I also have a model of the Speedy, a small brig which was commanded by Lord Cochrane in the Mediterranean in 1801. And while in command of her, he managed to capture a Spanish frigate, a much celebrated achievement. She was the ship featured in O'Brien's first novel of the Aubrey Maturin series, Master and Commander, though under the name Sophie. On the cover of the book, Jeff Hunt, then president of the Royal Society of Marine Artists, pictured a small quarter-decked Spanish brig. Why, I do not know. I'm also aware of more of her history. She was gifted to the Pope by Napoleon, following her and Cochrane's eventual capture by Admiral Lenoir's squadron off Gibraltar. Now, the booklet breaks down the building process into carefully planned steps, each supported by a photograph or a diagram. And here, for example, are 3 parts on the rigging process. The order in which it is done can be changed to suit the builder, but setting out steps is much more helpful than amassing all the fine rigging detail onto one sheet. This gives the builder terrific confidence. I've only seen this painstaking approach in one other instance, and that is in a series of books written by probably the best model maker in the UK, Philip Reed. In line with this principle of not overwhelming the model maker, Vanguard kits are designed to be capable of tabletop building. And finally, on principles, and although he does not list it as such, the precision provided with his product is outstanding. One is left asking how on earth it's done. Now to the research. The foundation to all of his models is, as far as I can see, the Admiralty plans obtainable from the National Maritime Museum's Plan Department at the Brass Foundry by Woolwich Arsenal. To the information these give him, he will look at all applicable reference books, and these include David Lyon's The Sailing Navy List. It's a very useful volume when making a choice of what kit to design next. I suspect he also makes use of Riff Winfield's series, British Warships in the Age of Sail. Now, Chris is very aware for the need for due diligence in researching his subjects, as if he gets it wrong, he knows that some know-all will be onto him after receiving the kit. For some of his models, the Conway series, Anatomy of the Ship, has been a considerable help. One of the points made to me was that the research and preparation period for a new kit takes on average 3 months to complete. Now to setting up of the business, starting in 2018. As I mentioned, the first kit was for the Alert. In this instance, the kit was designed by Chris, but the production was outsourced to a friend who had started up a similar business. The result was not up to the standard Chris required. He was aiming to go for lower volume, not always controllable if demand is high, which it has become, and higher quality in his production of kits that could be built on a dining room table, and by modelers with limited experience. In these early subcontracted kits, the laser cut parts were in lime and MDF, and the castings in white metal. Rejecting the subcontracted materials and taking the production under his own control, in 2019, Chris turned to pear wood and castings in resin, but the MDF was retained as it was inert. Now, this was an expensive shift, but it produced a far higher quality in the kits, which paid off. Pear wood is a tight grain material which has, when it comes to small scale work, a much more realistic finish than something like walnut, for instance. It's also a lovely colour. Equally, resin is a better base of fine detail than white metal. From now on, Chris developed a program to constantly improve his working practices and the precision and extent of detail on his models. His next model was Speedy, but still subcontracting the laser cut parts. This to be proved to be very expensive. So with this in mind, and the requirement for really high quality, he decided in 2021 to take out a business loan and purchase a laser cutter. This eventually led him to an uprated version of the Speedy or Flirt kits, Flirt being a sister ship of Speedy. Again, this paid off, for although it came with a steep learning curve and the conversion of his double garage into a proper workshop, it meant reduced manufacturing costs and enabled the addition of more detail that would have doubled the costs if these parts had still been subcontracted. At this time, he also added a 3D printer to his equipment. So from 2021, the design of almost all production was carried out in Chris's own premises. The 3D printer allowed him to produce gun barrels, stoves, and many other items that are bespoke to each kit. It also allowed him to cease using a stack photo etch method, which was necessary to combat the shrinking of the metal castings. I mentioned that Chris' ongoing aim was to increasingly improve his products. So I want to take you through a few of his models to show you what he has been able to achieve. Now, you've already heard about the Speedy and the Alert, both single flush deck sloops. Now, to do this, I will take you with it. I'll start with a look at some of his prototype builds. These currently reside at Antiqua Ships, a gallery, restoration and workshop and reference library complex near Taunton in Somerset, owned and run by one of our members, Alan McCreel. Here are 5 of Chris's prototype models on top of part of the Society of Model Shipwrights reference library. So let me take you on a joyride. First off, I do not have a prototype build of the Alert, but here are some images of the building of the hull with clinker planking and the deck, where you can see the improvements I mentioned earlier, made with a slightly stained deck and the guns fully equipped. Then here is the prototype build of Speedy. I can add to this by showing you that the skeleton is made up of MDF, as is unlikely to warp as wood can do. You can see that the hull is double planked, and note that the strakes above the whale are formed all together, with the effect of separate strakes being created by using the laser cutter in etching mode. Now we move to the Grecian, a Baltimore clipper design from America. All these, as you can see, are flush deck vessels with no lower deck worth modelling. However, here is a recent release, the Harpy, a diligence class brig sloop with a flush deck, but with a lower deck worth showing. Now, this arrangement is ingenious in that the bulkhead design must allow for an uninterrupted lower deck space. Now we move on to a large model, HMS Indefatigable. Now, 2 shots here, one to show her overall, as you can see here, and the other to show the intricately modelled taffrail produced using his laser cutter, which is also capable of etching. Astern from her is HMS Sphinx. A 20-gun ship, she has extensive detail under the quarterdeck, and note the etched panelling on the screens between the cabins and the relief shown in the fancy work covering her shear stroke. Underneath the forecastle, you can see the galley stove created by 3D printing. These last 2 shots are not from the prototype. These show what can be achieved with the etching of wood surfaces. And finally, we have Harpy again, but I would ask you to look at the resin casting of the ship's boat, which is 2 inches long. Fantastic detail. And here it is, painted up on the completed model. I'll just let you look at that for a moment, because it's quite delightful. Now, compare it with the next one, which is built in wood from the kit and is the same length, 2 inches. It looks well used. It's an important effect to get on a model, and it's sitting on my model of HMS Speedy. Now, Chris has been designing and producing quality kits for over 30 years. And in my experience, his kits provide a really excellent result on which one can dwell for hours and hours in admiration at the glorious sight of that most beautiful, to the aficionado, the sailing ship model. In conclusion, for those who want to buy these kits, they will not be the model maker. Their role is the model assembler and rigger. The model maker is Chris. So perhaps the skills required in a model maker of the future are no longer those associated with manual dexterity, and the use of power and hand tools, but the ability to create models with new electronic tools by programming and the use of CAD. Thank you.